Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Alia Papageorgiou, President, Press Club Brussels, Europe. She's also the Vice President of the Association of European Journalists in Belgium. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of our show, occasional guest host, rather, and it's always a pleasure to have you join us. Please like, please comment, please share. Please tell us where you're watching from. We want to make sure that folks around the world have a chance to watch today's show. We're going to get an international perspective on today's news and learn more about the great work of the Press Club Brussels, Europe. Before we dig into the show, we will show you a quick preview video, a little promo, to give you a sense of what's to come. Here's that video. This week on Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, our guest is Alia Papageorgiou, President of the Press Club Brussels, Europe, and Vice President of the Association of European Journalists in Belgium. The Press Club provides a platform for journalists based in or visiting Brussels. Their motto is, if you want to be heard in Europe, say it in Brussels. To be heard in Brussels, say it at the Press Club. The Press Club is particularly active on climate change, having set up Climate.Brussels to help deliver climate-related communications to media and stakeholders in Brussels, throughout Europe, and around the world. Another priority is media freedom. They are one of the organizers of the Daphne Caruana Galizia Prize for Journalism, along with the European Parliament. Daphne was a Maltese journalist assassinated for working on stories of government corruption in Malta. There are two special sections in the paper this weekend. The first, from New York Times Cooking, is 7 ingredients or fewer. 24 recipes that do so much with so little. We'll also look at the New York Times for Kids. Amber Williams, the New York Times for Kids editor, was our guest back in June. Sri Srinivasan is our host. I am the executive producer and occasional guest host, Neil Parekh. Paula Kiger helps produce the show, engaging with the audience on Facebook and LinkedIn. Sri has been hosting the New York Times Read Along for almost 7 years, with some amazing guests. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Again, Alia Papageorgiou is our guest, live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. That gives you a bit of a preview of what's to come. We have a great show planned, and we have a great guest. We are looking forward to our conversation with Alia Papageorgiou. Again, we are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Let's go ahead and welcome a few folks who are watching. Pradnya Haldapur is watching from Silver Spring, Maryland. Hello, Pradnya. Stefan Kaplan is watching. I know he's in Ramsey, New Jersey. Sri, tea or coffee, and the New York Times. And he's wishing everyone a good morning. Our friend Rahadian is watching from Brentwood, Long Island. Rahadian, thank you so much. It's always great to see you when you can join the show. And our friend Diane Stefani is watching from Margate, New Jersey. Thank you, Diane. Diane has been great. She's brought us a number of guests over the past few years. Miriam Berkeley is watching from Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Thank you, Miriam. Doug Levy is up early, as usual, from Marin County, California. Thank you, Doug. Thank you. With that, we'll bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good morning.
Hey, Neil. Good morning.
How are you?
Great to see you. Thanks for being such a great producer and guest host these last few weeks. Excited to be back and to have this great interview today, and not a US guest.
Yeah, yeah. We have, I want to throw in a couple more hellos. Ted Coltman is joining us from here in Washington, D.C. I'm based in Washington as well, as folks know. And we have Chris Rapson joining us from Thailand. So we're showing, we're expecting a broader viewership today, international viewership, with our guest who runs the Press Club Brussels, Europe. But we have certainly a lot in the news that we're going to cover today as well.
Sure, and let's get right to it. Let's talk about what's in the newspapers, and we are going to look at the Times, and then we will bring on Alia. All right, I don't know why the screen hasn't turned yet, so give me 1 second. Let me see if I can turn on. Let's see if
There we go. We lost the feed, so let's take a moment. So I'll take Sri off for just a moment while we're figuring out the feed. But like I said, thank you very much. Our guest, again, if you're just joining us, is Alia Papageorgiou. You can follow her on Twitter at Eurocentrique. She's the president, the Press Club Brussels, Europe, and the vice president of the Association of European Journalists in Belgium. So let's get back to our New York Times feed with Sri Srinivasan. Sri, there's the paper.
Hi, sorry about that, but here we are. Let's look at the front page. The lead story is entitled "To Free Treatment But Hounded by Hospitals." One of the nation's top nonprofit chains sent debt collectors after the needy. Profits over patients. A turn to the bottom line. And this off lead here is looking for a starter house. Good luck. Few build small homes, and existing ones are costly. So that's something that you can see: housing, medical care, major issues. Woman's death unleashes rage of Iran's youth. And this is something that I know some of you have seen this story already. Been following it for a few days. Surprising amount of public protest in Iran. Grueling fight in South slows Ukraine's push. And fighting loneliness with push-ups and prayer across the country, column by Ruth Graham. And for those of you who are baseball fans, you may have seen this story: Ruth, Aaron Bonds, and now Pujols. Albert Pujols joined a select group when he hit his 700th home run, and this is a landmark because only 4 people have ever done it in history. Film on jihad causes storm over identity, and this is a story that's also getting some attention. Let's take a look at what else is in the paper. This is the New York Times Magazine. Cover is "Where the Wild Things Are." Great title. 6 photographers journey around the world in search of animal encounters. This is that exciting part of the month when we have the New York Times for Kids. And we want to tell you that you can find a link to the PDF on our website. So definitely check that out at digimentors.group. And please say my name correctly. Of course, the editor's note is this section should not be read by grown-ups. And we had Amber Williams, the editor of the kids section, on in our archive. You can take a look. She was with us. Another freestanding section is the New York Times cooking section. And this time is 7 ingredients or fewer. And there are 24 recipes that do so much with so little. And you can get a PDF and a gift link to this New York Times cooking special. You can find it on our website at digimentors.group. So do take a look at that and grab it right now, digimentors.group. Here is Sunday Styles cover is about a new book by Constance Wu. Some of you know her from Crazy Rich Asians and Fresh Off the Boat. And she talks about how having kind of attention she did and the life she did is not at all glamour, and some of the issues that she had to deal with in the spotlight. Belly up, this bar has stories. A relic from the Stork Club, once a haunt for the glitterati, sits idle in a shuttered tavern. This is Sunday Style. Sunday Business cover is all about the police and online hate, real-life arrests. Germany responds to internet insults, harassment, and threats with criminal charges in defense of free speech. And Silicon Valley's Boys Club strikes a defiant pose. An insular culture which forgives missteps by men remains largely unchanged. And that's the front of Sunday Business. Sunday Opinion cover is a far-right darling and working-class Democrat are locked in a tight House race in Washington. The battle captures where our country is and where it's headed, our political future. And don't look for every moment to be a 10. Sometimes you have to celebrate the 4s, 5s, and 6s. I guess a comment on Instagram culture. And the Arts and Leisure cover is, for Hemingway fans, it's an archival feast. Penn State now houses the most significant collection of the writer's materials uncovered in 60 years. So all Hemingway fans should definitely check out the story in Arts and Leisure. We have so much to talk about. We want to welcome everyone who is watching. I see Linda Lawrence is watching from Long Island. Pradnya says the paper looks especially interesting today. And Paula, our wonderful producer, is linking to the free links that you can get for the sections. And my Sunday, here it says, Linda says, my Sunday New York Times delivery is late today. It hasn't come in yet, so she gets to see the preview here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Tell us how you are. Tell us how your Sunday is going. If there's anything in the news you want to discuss, this is a perfect time to do it. Just drop a question. And please hit share and tag your friends. They can watch now or later. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So please do share this with your friends and family. We are very excited about our guest today, so let's tell you about her. Alia Papageorgiou is the president of the Press Club of Brussels in Europe, and she's on Twitter at Eurocentrique, and we are just thrilled to have her with us today. Good morning.
Hi, morning. Isn't it great to see the newspaper? Isn't it great to just go through that? I have to be honest, it's been a while since I've had the chance to, especially the New York Times, but any newspaper, which is not something I should say publicly, but thank you so much for having me. And it's so nice to talk to you this morning. And I do have to say it's a real pleasure because I have been following you on the Sundays, for years.
Thank you. And we're thrilled to have you with us. And there is something magical about the paper, but sure. I gather from how you describe it, you are a digital person and are consuming almost everything online.
Unfortunately, I mean, I was thinking about this week because I knew we were going to talk today, and I became a journalist in 2006, and I worked for 3 weeklies out of my journalism career. One part-time, but the other 2 were full-time, like my home. It felt like my first home, not even my second home at the time. And they were really newspaper-led newspapers. This was back in 2006 to 2010-12. And we had to shift basically the newsroom from getting, the newspaper-led print being the key to becoming social media focused, social media driven, digital driven. And I remember at one point, this week, seeing you on Facebook, because I always also moved from Australia to Belgium when Facebook kind of started. And I know you were there at some point, I would say during 2008, maybe 2009, or am I wrong in the timing?
No, this is all, it's all a blur, right?
That's when it started. Yeah, exactly. But I remember you would remind me of the feel and the touch and the thing and the going through the newspaper. When I do have a moment to sit down with a paper, it's just bliss, but it's not as often as it should be. I have to fix that because it's definitely not dead. I mean, if it's print, it has a prime place, especially in Europe, where it's still actually, you could still I walk past a little like newspaper shop in my neighborhood, and I'm so proud actually when I see, whoever's in there buying every Sunday morning the big papers and the economic papers to whatever they're buying to read with their breakfast. But it's
Sure.
such a pleasure to meet you and talk with you.
Sure. Well, here's Pradnya talking about one experience in America, which is that her son is now old enough to walk down to the end of the driveway by himself and fetch the newspaper.
Fantastic.
It's there's so much to talk about, but let's start by telling us about the press club.
Sure. So the Press Club is kind of a pride and joy of journalists here in the city. We hope, anyway. It's been around for 12 years this year. We still haven't had the official 10-year celebration because of COVID, but we're back to 100% function, of course. But we meant to have this big party in 2020, but it still hasn't happened. So that's something to come. But so it started with the idea that which has been heavily supported by the city of Brussels and also all the journalists and correspondents that are here. There are many correspondents who could be just the one person from their outlet, say from somewhere in Eastern Europe or somewhere from Kuwait or somewhere from any country of the world who are based in reporting what's happening at these institutions. The sunshine. I won't complain about the sunshine, but it's making its way around my desk. There we go.
There you go.
In any case, it's a place where we thought it was necessary for journalists to meet, talk to their people they want to interview, sources. There are many events, press events, press conferences. Of course, we've become fully digital since the pandemic, so it's also a hybrid event space as well. And it's just, it's been a really great honor to have been chosen to be their president last November. It was kind of a surprise, but...
Congratulations on that. Of course, a lot of world capitals have press clubs.
Exactly.
I'm surprised that yours isn't decades old. Normally they've been around for decades.
Absolutely.
So was there another institution before this one, or?
There is not exactly like ours. That was missing in Brussels, like a classic press club, and we're also very much linked to, I think that the oldest one is in Vienna, if I remember correctly, because we've had some conferences and we're part of the International Press Clubs Association. We actually have the presidency this year, and we're very much connected with the National Press Club in DC, and we have that global network in all of these things. But I believe Vienna is one of the oldest, which is centuries old, yes, but we didn't. There is a building called the Residence Palace, which the Belgian government has given to journalists to use for offices, not for meeting, a lounge, press conference. So it's quite unique, actually.
That's great.
And of course, it was missing. Yeah, exactly. Since most places around Europe have had them for hundreds of years. Yeah.
We have a photo of your motto of the club. So first of all, you can tell us what were some of the pictures we're looking at, and then we can...
Sure. So this is me being very excited that we had one of our first events after. It's not the most professional shot I can imagine, but it was one of our first events after the pandemic. We had to launch Climate.Brussels, actually, that your team, you've also... highlighted in the video that was announcing that I'd be here with you today. So we had the Minister of Environment and Climate of Belgium came and inaugurated this website where we're really trying to use our platform as much as we can to discuss, the most, to bring forward this, to make a community out of everything that's EU, climate, worldwide related. We actually have instigated like a World Press Club's climate partnership where we try to really push, especially around the COP events, the global COP climate meetings. We try to do like a relay around the world to say, okay, everyone, let's have a big press conference where we're trying to get this word out.
So yeah, here's a request to tell us more about the climate work.
Yeah, well, it's been super interesting. It's a membership platform where we send out every day what is the latest news on climate It can be from countries, it can be companies, it can be, we have a climate drink or get together once a month, called Together Tuesdays as well, where we try to bring climate journalists together with experts. It was about 3 years ago, I believe now, I was working with a magazine called Revolve, which is all about sustainability. And there we became part of this organization called Covering Climate Now. And you may have heard of them with the Columbia Journalism School, with the Columbia Journalism Review, sorry. So this is something that I've also tried to bring more to Belgian media and European media to be part of Covering Climate Now.
So
I
it's
know
great. Yeah, it's great to
Yeah.
see. Great to see you taking a leadership role in this. Not many journalist organizations do this. Of course, they cover it all the time, but by putting this focus, I think you would bring attention to journalists about the importance of this.
Yeah, we try our best. You know, the times are very strange, and sometimes, you know, there is a pandemic that comes up, or there is, say, a war now, tragically and horrifically. But you know, I was just watching the news about what happened in Canada overnight. Maybe that was overnight for you as well. There's this hurricane that's blown away houses and bridges and things, and it's not going away. You know, this is the crux of the time where it's actually going to get worse. Oh, interesting effects of the sun on my face. It's like a horror movie. I have to do something about that.
No, it'll adjust itself, I'm sure. But
I hope so.
yeah. So tell us about some of the things that are happening in Europe around climate change that rest of us may not know as much about. What are some interesting things?
Sure.
We always think that Europe is more cognizant and sensitive to these matters than Americans are.
Well, I have to say that when you're here in Brussels, you do hear a lot about what you call the Green Deal. I suppose we call it the EU Green Deal, because the European Union, which has its institutions here in Brussels, and a lot of journalists, of course, come around and move here, try covering those institutions. It is a top priority. The policy has been building for, I would say, more than a decade, of trying to, more than even 20. I mean, I started covering that in 2008, and I had gone to the COP15 in Copenhagen, and you get like the side of the countries and the side of what these institutions are trying to do. And they had already built up this idea of, we need a common grid across the continent. We need efficient buildings, more renewable power. It's taken a longer time than one would imagine. Like when you would hear leaders back then in 2008 talk about these things, it seemed like they could really do much more. So this is one of the reasons why all this, you know, pushing the climate agenda is so important to us. But there is no, you know, like if you take a normal train ride from here to go to another town, it's very rare to see a house without solar panels, for example. It's very rare to hear that, you know, it's very common that you would take a train to go somewhere instead of taking a car and be like a personal kind of combustion unit. like it's very hard that you wouldn't hear parents complaining that there's too many cars on the street and they really want their kids to just play in a green area with lots of nature. And so it's become a real priority. Now, to match that with the policy, it seems a bit hard. I mean, the talk is there, the rhetoric's there, the Green Deals get passed, but it's hard to get it to the everyday, if you know what I mean. It's hard to see that it's going to shift completely as quickly as the weather is, for example.
Right. We have a comment here from Apollo who's pointing out that Amsterdam and Venice seem to have ignited the focus on climate change. Is that fair to ask?
I suppose, absolutely. I'm trying to think why Amsterdam, but definitely Venice sinking is. But Venice was built on water, actually, so that's perhaps why. But apart from the fact that historically is sinking the city of Venice. And the Dutch have an amazing kind of history and knowledge of how to build up dams, how to store against infrastructure that's being battered by water. That's massive. But also the fires, not bushfires. Sorry, that's my Australian name. With the fires during the summer of in the Mediterranean this year, for example, or have really brought home the message of things are really different climate-wise.
Well, our discussion of climate is really touching a nerve here. Diana, watching from the San Francisco Bay Area before 6 a.m. local time. Thank you for bringing the climate change message to the next level. Not all heroes wear capes. So I like that. And we also have a comment here from Pradnya, who leads the Institute for Sustainable Communities and would love to connect offline. So that'd be great for both of you to connect. And the idea for journalists to focus on this is so important. Do you have in Europe the same kind of far right and right wing and conservative media that fights against climate change news and acknowledging the problems the way we have in America?
I wouldn't say it's as extreme as the mainstream media, but the mainstream media in some countries is actually Facebook, for example, to mention one particular platform. And that is having a real shift in the way that people receive their news and receive their opinions and group together in their communities and kind of get really polarized amongst themselves. Like my personal experience, I'm Greek Australian, so I also have the Greek experience where my parents live now, and I've definitely seen the Facebook effect in that country, polarizing politics. Today, for example, is election day in Italy. I don't know if you've heard about that, but there is a candidate who is meant to be a quite right-minded of the far, according to which media you listen to, far right is the policies that she is using to fight this, and apparently she's the favorite. So I think even if it's not a mainstream, it's not a mainstream channel like a Fox, which I also have experience with that in Australia, where Rupert Murdoch, his media is, I think, if I remember correctly, 57% of the media is owned by Rupert Murdoch in Australia. So I have that experience of it being mainstream. But in Europe, there is a bit more pluralism, but there are still many problems, I would say mainly from the digitalization of media, from economic crises, from deficits in democracy, whatever that means, from deficits that have really come up because of the business models change in the media that you can see in politics and in mainstream.
Yeah, the Italian news is something that we're following here. This is right after Sweden also took a right turn. And so we have to pay attention to that. Walk us through some of these other photographs.
Yeah, so this would be a typical event at the Press Club. I believe this was the opening of a small film festival that we had, but I could be wrong, where we were showing films that really focused on human rights aspects. We've had some, how can I explain this? Some pretty interesting press conferences where, for example, there is a politician in Spain who was calling for Catalonia to be a separate part of Spain. And he left Spain and came to Brussels, and the first place he went to was a press conference in the Press Club. So, and people are still sometimes like, but why did you let him come? And why did you do this? And where, so there's been some sensational type of moments where people see it as the platform to come and say whatever they do believe they should come and say in Brussels. So that's been really interesting to watch in the last 10 years as well, because it really sparks a conversation. It really gets different opinions going. Like we had now with everything that's happening, in Ukraine, and with this aggression from Russia, we turned our club into we're called the We Are Kiev Press Club, like to support journalists in exile, who a few have come to Brussels to work or try to work, in any case, and we support in any way that we can what we do. But we had at one stage we had the question of whether we would say yes because the Russian ambassador was thinking to come and speak at the press club. So we had this internal conversation, well, what happens here? And we never really got to that point because they never officially asked. But it's an interesting kind of platform to bring forth. And it is our motto, where we say, if you want to be heard, as you see in this photo, say it in Brussels, and to be heard in Brussels, say it at the press club. We hope so. We hope it is an open platform. This is the other association of European journalists that I work with. That's more to try, and it's similar, but it's not an actual place where people can go. But it's an association. We actually meet at the press club, since I'm president of the press club. But we also have a house there to help correspondents in Brussels with any issues that they might have when they're here in Belgium, and provide. And this is a photo of our beautiful city, Brussels. This is a UNESCO heritage listed ancient square in the center. And this is a flower carpet that comes out every 2 years with all fresh flowers from all the corners of the country. And they redid it this year after, I think it was a 3 or 4 year break due to Mexico being the chosen country to honor. So the style and design was fresh flowers in Mexican design.
And tell us about this prize.
Yeah, so one of the things we do work a lot on with the Association of European Journalists is media freedom, and also the press club, who helps run this prize with the European Parliament. I don't know if you've heard of the European Parliament. It's representatives from all over Europe who make up over 750 places in the European Parliament. It's a big institution. So they become members of the European Parliament, and they represent their home countries in Brussels. They work here for plenaries and to make decisions. I think it's 2 weeks a month they're here. 1 week they're back in the constituency in the country, and 1 week is off to recalibrate the difference between what the national interest and the European interest, and get everything organized. Daphne Caruana Galizia was actually blown up in her car. She was a journalist in Malta in 2017. I believe it was the 16th of October, because we also give the prize around that time, because she was talking about corruption in Malta. And I think she had been a mainstream newspaper journalist and then became a blogger at that time, and when this happened. And since then, now they're almost at the point where there's been progress in the court cases, but it's still not that someone is convicted or that there is a final decision on what happened. And this prize has been instigated by the European Parliament, and we help with the running of we're one of the organizers of the prize on media freedom and for European investigative journalists. But it's been really interesting to see what the follow-up is after this horrible act. There's been groups of journalists in our foundation that get together and try to continue her work. And there's been like real kind of recourse, as in it was proven that the government was part of this corrupt work that she was following. Like there's a lot of things that still happen. Her sons have a foundation that continue her work. Last year we brought to Brussels. This year we brought to Brussels the Malta Times editor has written a play. It's called They Blew Her Up, and it's about her life. And it was kind of an interactive, multi-sensorial thing that was very impressive. But it's trying to keep this work we're going. But actually, attacks on journalists have never been higher, even in Europe. Trying to impede their work, especially if it gets towards governmental corruption or anything like that. It's really, there's barely funding for the main problems, let alone these bigger problems that you really run into issues when you start looking into, I think, from what I understand.
Well, thank you for telling us about that. And there's a podcast that folks may want to check out called Who Killed Daphne, that you can check out and learn more about this. I think answers and justice is still being sought for her. Folks, you are listening to a conversation with the president of the Press Club in Brussels. Alia Papageorgiou is with us. Thank you for joining us. We will be reading the New York Times with her in just a few minutes, but we did want to talk a little bit more about some of the projects they're doing. So here's Burning Down the House.
So this is a writers' festival we're having in mid-October, where the main theme is climate again. So hopefully we will have quite a few authors. They haven't all been announced yet, but on climate and politics, climate action. There's already a lot of journalists involved, but now to have more authors involved is kind of our main goal. But to have this conversation, looked at from a slightly different point of view. We're very excited. It's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I'm glad to actually be able to finally get there.
Dr. Lippy Roy, who's been a guest multiple times on the show, says climate change associated with many adverse health issues, respiratory, food, waterborne infections, mental health, etc. So I'm so glad you're able to focus on this. I apologize. Our dog is saying hello.
He has opinions about climate, obviously.
Exactly. Miriam Berkeley says, about the right-wing candidate in Italy, I wonder how many people are voting for her just because she's a woman. You can't count on sex alone to indicate decency or empathy. Of course, in America, we know that the fact that Hillary Clinton was a woman was a factor in her not getting elected, among other factors as well.
Yeah, I mean, the women in politics, it's such an issue. I was looking at Twitter this morning about Giorgia Meloni, and apparently on her Instagram, because Meloni means melons in Italian, she took 2 melons, and that was her last post kind of before the election. And everyone's like, what is this? How is this supposed to translate for future women in politics who are looking at these types of visuals? But it's not easy, and it is still very much underrepresentation. And even in Europe, in this European Parliament that I was talking about, for example, they're still striving to have equality and parity in the numbers, but it's not yet there. And in the European institutions, they also talk about gender equality, but now it's like the focus is let's have parity in the management, because still in the number of the top leading roles, that's not there. And it took the European institutions had come up with this law of kind of making businesses across Europe that are big businesses and have boards, and they're big, how do you call that? Like a big business, that they would impose that there would be gender balance on the boards of those businesses. And it took 10 years and big political backlash of not letting it go through, where now it's finally passing, I think, at the end of this year. Like, it's not there, and it's a big idea, but it's equality and parity in these things, and in politics is definitely not there yet. So
other countries are trying that as well. India has quotas for women on boards, but it's not been as successful as the folks had hoped. Before we move on, I just want to, since you're in Europe, I want to talk about some of the big news that came out of Europe this week, and that was President Putin's remarks this week, where he accused the US and Europe of engaging in nuclear blackmail against his country and warned that Russia has lots of weapons of its own.
Yeah.
He said, to those who allow themselves such statements about Russia, I want to remind you that our country also has various weapons of destruction, and some components are more modern than those of the NATO countries. There's
Yeah.
nothing like a nuclear threat to bring back attention to the conflict in Ukraine. So can you talk about that? And what is it
Yeah, I
like to
mean, it's
be at the
just been
center of Europe and in Brussels?
absolutely.
And you know threats like that are aimed in part on Brussels. So
No, no, absolutely. I mean, it's just been, like I was saying before, like horrific, tragic, unbelievable. In some, in some minutes, you kind of forget, but it's definitely here, and it's definitely happening, and it's right. And they're our neighbors, and it's right next door to Europe. So of course it affects us immensely. And so since February 24th, where this terrible aggression started happening, I mean, the border countries around Ukraine have just been phenomenal. This is what we've seen here in our kind of news and daily, and even in Belgium, because it's been across Europe. There was this the European institutions decided to bring forth this thing called a temporary protection directive, where they were actually saying anyone who comes from Ukraine has, X, Y, Z rights to move, to be able to have help, to be able to have refuge, to be able to have health and work and somewhere to stay. So that just has been phenomenal. And there's been more than 10 million people who've crossed and come towards Europe, and more than 4.9 million people who applied for this temporary protection to actually use it and have these rights. But it's difficult to imagine that we're now on the 25th of September. So all these months later, like 8 months later, and it's still happening. It only appears to be getting more difficult. It only appears to be getting more frightening and complicated and longer than one would have imagined that it would have been going on for. And of course, now you see the other side of there's a lot of reports on these Russian men who are trying to leave their country. So that also makes you think twice about what's happening. And it's a very scary year.
and I wonder how families in Europe explain this to their children.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're in Ukraine or in the direct assault areas, but children especially must be so scared.
Absolutely, but it's also been really amazing to see how many people are welcoming. And there's in our neighborhood, there's been drives for clothes, for books, for any help possible. But in other neighborhoods, I know that it's they specifically placed people in. There's places for schools, there's places to stay. People took people in in our neighborhood. Took people in who had come to Brussels and needed somewhere to stay, because they also encouraged that they also encouraged people fleeing from the war, Ukrainians or other nationalities fleeing from the war, that that they didn't just stay in the neighboring countries, because it was such a in Poland, in Estonia and Latvia, there's been a lot of Romania, Moldova, there's a lot of people staying there because it was next door. It was very similar to them, but it's a lot of pressure on these countries as well. So it's been really amazing to see the response really in Europe, like to see that in the neighborhood there are. You can hear Ukrainian. You hear about a new school that's for kids that only speak Ukrainian. Like it's been a really eye-opening situation, especially from someone my age who would never have experienced. I mean, I guess if I had been in a different country, I would have experienced, but I hadn't experienced anything like this before in this lifetime.
And finally, before we get to the newspaper,
Yeah.
I want to ask someone who lives in Brussels about Brexit and what has been, we see the problems that Brexit has caused for the UK itself. And what is the general feeling in Brussels looking back at the last few years? And now, of course, the architect of Brexit himself has been kicked out of office in Boris Johnson.
I mean, it's a really complicated divorce, you know. It's a really painful, what's the word I want to use? Like an ocean that's just been kind of shifted, because it was such a key part of building up what the European Union was, and what the relationship with the whole continent and the island of the UK was. I, from a personal point of view, I actually went to university in the UK, so that's the first place where I was like an adult and did my first degree, and it feels like home. And my sister still lives there. I mean, but that's an aside. But it's been kind of like, okay, well, you made your decision. This is from kind of the EU's point of view in general terms. Like, okay, you made your decision, you want to go. So we'll just have to deal with all the paperwork and everything that comes with it to actually make this happen. And this is what you, UK, want to do. But it's not so simple. It's not so non-emotional. Like when you see lots of stories about, say, UK holidaymakers in Malta or in Spain or in Greece going back home after their holidays and complaining that there's a queue for them to go in, or if their pensioners in Spain, something changes in the Brexit aftermath, and they're something changes in the bureaucracy and they don't have the same rights as before, and then they bring it up, and there's a lot of people who just say, well, this is what you wanted, this is what you voted for, like, didn't you realize? And there's plenty of, I've seen many conversations, on the border, or if there's issues with trucks delivering goods to the UK on the border, or travel to the UK, and there's any kind of friction there. It's like, well, didn't you realize that this was what was going to happen? And Boris Johnson, he actually was a journalist here in Brussels. He and his father was one who worked for the European Union institutions. So it feels like it was kind of a dream of his, that could it ever be realized that we would actually leave? And then when it actually happened, it's just created this whole mess.
Yeah, and we need to acknowledge not just Boris Johnson, but the media's effect on this, right? Disinformation, just the way in the right-wing media in America has made Washington a villainous place and a swamp, and terms like that have affected the perception of the importance of Washington, D.C. Brussels itself was made the villain of this story and made it a poisonous place.
Absolutely. Perfect. Magnificent point. Because I always think of Washington, D.C. not as a swamp, obviously. So that parallel is, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that.
And Pradnya says xenophobia trumps logic, and the word Trump is also important, right? Like it's the way that Trump himself didn't expect to be president or to win the presidency, and that first time around, and he did. And Boris Johnson never expected to be prime minister, and he always wanted to be, but there you have it. So let's talk a little bit about the news, about the rest of the news, and take a look at the New York Times. There's just so much to discuss. We were talking earlier about the magic of print and seeing it like this. The lead story, entitled to free treatment but hounded by hospitals. One of the nation's top nonprofit chains send debt collectors after the needy. You know how messy the American health system is, but here the nonprofits are being part of this story, and problems being uncovered there. Here is a story about looking for a starter house. Good luck. About 8% of new single-family homes are 1,400 square feet or less, compared to about 70% in the 1940s. So it was possible to get a starter home, a small home to set up your family, 70% in the 1940s, and now only 8% of new single-family homes are 1,400 square feet or less. So that one statistic captures the problem here.
It's an interesting story, property. I mean, I don't know if it's the lack of land, or if it's just the way that the markets are, but it's such a global story. Like, I was talking to my mom yesterday. Sorry, Sri, to interrupt. You're looking
No, please. Yeah.
We were talking about this little house that my parents bought when they got married in Melbourne, in Australia. whose prices have just gone crazy. Like I can't even explain what that house market is like right now. But she said that in, I guess it was early 70s, mid 70s, they bought this little house for 13,000, and it was just a starter house, and then eventually they sold it and bought their actual house where we lived, etc. And if they had kept that one little house that was in the center of Melbourne, that would be at least 2 million today, because the prices have just skyrocketed, shifted the value of who lives in central Melbourne compared to rural Melbourne, all of these things. But you see that everywhere, actually.
Sure.
In
Well,
Europe.
I'm talking to you from New York, where these,
exactly.
these super tall buildings that are made for billionaires to have homes, and we see that in London as well. Let's look at some of the other stories here. Tell us about the coverage you're seeing in Europe about the Iran youth protest over a woman's death. She had removed her hijab and her headscarf, and was that was part of why she was killed. And now there's a kind of protest for several days. 8 days of rage, exhilaration, and street battles is what this article by Vivian Yi and Farnaz Fasihi says.
No, much coverage, constant coverage, surprise coverage, but they keep reporting, which is crucial, of course. It's terrible and shocking that that would happen as a result of like civil kind of observation in their legal system of that would be the result. But now, of course, to see, hopefully, supporting them, that they could get what they need to have to be able to live in there every day, because it's
I just want to point out that this young woman, Mahsa Amini, 22 years old, was wearing her hijab, but they felt that she was improperly dressed. It could be something as simple as a wisp of hair protruding from her headscarf. They put her in a van and drove her to a detention center where she was to undergo re-education. 3 days later, she was dead. And that's the morality police that do this. And so her name is something her name we will remember, Mahsa Amini, and how she has her death has unleashed this anger among young people in Iran.
It was interesting to see this week they were interviewing her father, who was completely, like, he's the one who brought all this to light apparently afterwards, apart from, of course, the rage of the women who've been on the streets, and all power to them, but it can't be easier.
Here is Ukraine coverage on the front page of the Times as well. We'll go inside the paper and take a look at some of the sections here. 4 audiobooks to listen to now. Newspapers are doing a lot of service journalism now, and here's a service. And are you an audiobooks person?
I mean, if I start with audiobooks, I think I will never get off my phone, because I'm very much addicted to podcasts at the moment. Like, if it goes to books, I'm still trying to read an actual book. And yourself?
I'm not as much an audiobooks person, but I know the value of the intimacy of podcasts and audiobooks and all of that. Here's a story from Canada.
What is
village
that?
full of grievances, a raid only deepens distrust. New conspiracy theories take root, reflecting ever wider divisions in Canada. And you had mentioned, for those of you who've not seen it overnight, Hurricane Fiona has hit the Canadian coast and is causing lots of homes to be swept away. Fighting escalates as Ukraine resists Kremlin's annexation move. And protests, this is more on the protests, and you can see the police are firing into crowds. We've seen them using AK-47s and just shooting
this is in
crowds.
Iran. I believe that the numbers are close to 30 now of people who are killed. So, it's just...
So you can see the New York Times is definitely still covering Ukraine. Here's a full page continued story. in here. And
It's been yeah. I mean, I'm glad it can't be easy to cover, but it's been super extensive. I know that New York Times Brussels bureau chief here has done some very interesting angles of how it affects trade, how it affects the ports in Europe, how it affects all of these things.
here's a full page about India. Yeah,
India.
yeah, there's a whole page on India, the aiding democracy abroad, straining it at home. Modi subtly tightens his grip with little pushback from allies. And here he is, photo with Putin, President Biden, and this is interesting to see how the world's largest democracy is pushing for democracy abroad and using its connections and the strength of its the democratic institutions in India and how that's changing. Here's an Italian, here's the Italy story, front runner whose party's legacy is rooted in fascism. And so when we say right wing, you also have to know that Berlusconi, who was supporting basically Putin's agenda in Ukraine in recent remarks. Japan faces backlash over Abe's state funeral. I think it's something about the costs, maybe, is part of the story here. And
that was such a shock.
Yeah. And here is the national section. Alone in a new world with vast space and sheep. Latin American herders in U.S. on work visas, but citizenship eludes. So these are folks coming here to do some of the farm work that Americans won't do. But they're getting work visas, but not temporary visas, but not citizenship.
So much on migration lately. It's been you can see a lot of border differences or something. It's really, I don't remember seeing that much migration news from the US in the last few years.
And of course, that's also a climate change story, as that we'll see that on a global scale. How control of the House could go to Republicans. So this is looking at the current state of Democrats and Republicans, and in recent months, some people have thought it might not flip. The House may not flip, but you're seeing there's vulnerability here, and something that we'll be paying close attention to.
And that's something that refers to 2024 or elections?
No, 2022. These are the congressional elections. Yeah.
Right.
And a lot can change between now and then. Ron Thomas is watching. Greetings from Kuwait. Just landed. Ron is a former guest who lives in Dubai and always watches from an interesting place. EPA creates office to make racial equality bigger part of environmental rules. And we know the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was decimated during the Trump years. So they're doing other things now. Here is story. Here's an unusual ad. This is Equal Pay for Team USA Act. This is for equality for women's soccer, and there's a whole ad here for that. And
they have been doing a good job of talking about equal things for many sectors, no?
Yes, exactly. Well, we just ended the U.S. Open tennis tournament here, which was the first to give men and women the same purse in tennis. And here's more stories about the hospitals going after patients. And I want to thank you. During pandemic, family and friends provided a lifeline. So this is folks. This article is part of the I Want to Thank You series. We asked readers to tell us who helped them get through the pandemic.
Oh, that's great.
Lots to see there. And fighting middle-aged lonely. Sorry?
Who wouldn't read that if your name is there as one of the ones who helped? That's so great.
Exactly. Yeah. Fighting middle-aged loneliness with push-ups and prayer. So interesting. And let's see. Let's go past here. We're into the obit section. I love reading obits. I don't know what do you think of obit coverage or obituaries in newspapers?
Well, I mean, I mentioned I started working as a journalist in 2006 in Australia, and that was for a Greek community newspaper. I mean, I was working for the English section, but there was a Greek section, and actually the most popular part of it was the obits, because that community only kind of found out which elder person or who in their community had passed away because of this newspaper that came out. So it's really, I mean, in a community that reads the paper, it's super important because maybe you won't have anywhere else where you can see this news. Yeah, that was sad about the Cuckoo's Nest actress as well.
Yeah, here's a story. Louise Fletcher, evil Nurse
Mhm.
Ratched on Cuckoo's Nest. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's
Yeah.
Nest is dead at 88. She played one of the most memorable villains in film history. She won the 1976 Academy Award for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
And there's also a reboot kind of TV series about Nurse Ratched
Mm.
that's
Ah,
on
yeah, of
streaming
course.
now.
Yeah.
And Newton Harrison, 89, artist who was a founder of the eco art movement, has died. I like to approach everything with an open mind and a bad attitude. How great is that pull quote from his
Mhm.
obituary? I like to approach everything with an open mind and a bad attitude. So let's go into the rest of the paper here. We want to tell everyone that the New York Times. Neil, go ahead.
Sorry, Sri. I just wanted to jump in and point out when we talk about obits, the New York Times has a series called Overlooked,
Yes.
which highlights obituaries of well-known people, but women, people of color who did not get an obituary when
Oh.
they passed away. So it's a really incredible series that they have. Ida B. Wells, among others, and we had Amy Padnani on the show to talk about this project.
That was a wonderful project that's led by Amy, and so many folks like Diane Arbus is a
Mm.
huge photographer, and shocking that she didn't get an obit in 1971. That
Mm.
tells you, when you talk about equality, Alia, this is kind of Sylvia Plath didn't get one. This is
Absolutely.
like shocking.
Yeah.
Then Henrietta Lacks, we now know the story of the cancer cells that were taken from her body without permission, made into a huge movie and all of that. But you saw some of those were white women whose story wasn't told. And here's an Indian actress, a legendary actress named Madhubala, who
Mm.
died, and her life, tragic life, mirrored Marilyn Monroe's.
Yeah, you always wait to see what the New York Times' obituary will be about someone who's so well known. It's really interesting. It's been actually interesting this week. There was this elder Indigenous person who passed away in Australia, who was an actor and a big theatre goer, and it happened around the same time as the Queen. So there were kind of comparisons of and because his name was Charles as well, and they would call him Charles in the theater. And the New York Times obituary came out, and there's actually been a bit of oh, but that's not exactly it, and they didn't really get what he was to Australia. So that's been super interesting to watch that conversation this week. I mean, it's not a big conversation, but
Sure.
you
Well,
always feel like you
this
want
is
to
the
see
thing
what the
about
New York
how.
Times obituary will be when it's a big personality.
Well, this is also interesting to think about how things have become so global, right? Like this,
Mm.
that story would not have had an impact many years ago before the internet, because it would have been not covered by the Times at all. And now this is
Yeah.
because it's more global in nature. Here is the New York Times cooking section, and we want to tell you that
Mhm.
you can get, even if you don't have the print newspaper, you can get a link and the PDF at readalong.link/NYT cooking. Just go to our website, readalong.link/NYT cooking, and you can find it there. So everybody, you don't want to miss this. 24 recipes that do so much with so little, 7 ingredients or fewer. And it's a 36 page insert, and you can get the PDF by going to readalong.link/NYT cooking. So please go grab it and get
Do
a
you
copy for
cook,
yourself.
Sri?
Yeah. No, I mean very little, very little. My
Yeah.
wife and my kids love cooking, so
Oh, awesome.
I'm lucky. Here
I have to say,
is
the best brownie recipe I've ever done is the New York Times Katharine Hepburn's brownies.
oh wow.
It's like unbeatable. It's like no matter what you do, how basic the ingredients that you bought, or how good quality ingredients there, it always turns out perfect. But yeah, this is fantastic. I have to say a big shout out to this great newspaper for kids that started in Australia, which tragically has stopped now. It was called the Crinkle News or Crinkle Cut News. But it was so great, and it's so good to see that there's a newspaper out for them where they can get the New York Times.
Yeah, this is once a month they have this, and again you can get the print only section. We have the full PDF is on our website until noon Eastern today. So for the next 2 hours, 2.5 hours, if you go to readalong.link/NYT kids, even if you don't have kids, if you know someone who has kids, send them this link, readalong.link/NYT kids, noon Eastern time. So 2.5 hours. And look at some of the things they have here. Please say my name correctly. A day with diabetes. Through a cartwheel through space. It's a bug hunting time, and how to start a school newspaper. How much fun is that? So if you have young people in your life, send them this link by going to readalong.link/NYT kids or readalong.link/NYT cooking for the cooking stories there as well. So do check that out. We have about 20 minutes left with our guest, and so we're just going to look through some of these other sections here. The arts and leisure section covers about Hemingway fans. An archival feast is now available at Penn State. What are some of the things you're reading or watching online? Have you been out to theater and plays and all of that after the pandemic?
Not lately. I do have to say I went to see this play that we brought to Brussels about Daphne Caruana Galizia, Colin Hanks. It was called They Blew Her Up, which we brought to Brussels from Malta, and that was like a real sensory experience. But otherwise, I'm reading more local press. There's a publication, well, it's not publication anymore, it's only online. It's called The Bulletin, so I'll read a lot of that. And there's some independent journalism here in Brussels covering European Union politics. I called the EU Observer. Is that? Oh, the fat suit. Yeah, I did see that article during the week. And
we'll just talk about that. That's because Brendan Fraser plays a 600-pound man in a movie called The Whale, and he's gotten a lot of attention for that. And here the article says, why doesn't the entertainment industry simply hire large actors to play large characters? Unknowns could bring a different edge, zest, and curiosity to many roles. And this is Dick Cheney, played by Christian Bale.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very good question.
So many conversations around that. Yeah. Also, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Brussels Times, which is a quarterly magazine. It's been out for about 2-3 years now, if I'm not mistaken, but a good editor called Leo Senderitz has just taken over doing that quarterly, and I've written a piece there about an old theater in Brussels, but I'm trying to think of a way, if I get time, because there's not much time these days, to write a piece about it sounds frivolous, but it's about young people getting fake nails, and I have this theory that it has something to do with how much they like flipping through their phone, but there must be something else to it, because it makes me think of the 80s and press-ons, and how like plastic and nails would even have come together in a sort of strange manifestation anyway of the working woman and not working woman and feminism, but I can't. Hopefully
I look forward to reading it. Sounds like
I know. I will eventually.
Some of that also has to do with Instagram and all that visual culture we now live in, and kind of the pressure to
but
celebrities using them as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you can imagine that
someone putting hashtag on or something. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, I think I saw someone putting hashtag or using the colors or something of the nails to promote something. That's true. Anyway, so I don't know what the New York.
And here we're looking at the Brussels Times as you were describing it. So
I'm not sure if it must be inspired by the New York Times, mustn't it? Look at that head must. But slightly. I mean, I'm sure many newspapers around the world have been inspired by
Yeah, we want to tell people if you're new here, we do this every Sunday, but it's not just about the New York Times, it's about the
Right.
news in general and the importance of journalism and fighting disinformation. And we've done this with the Washington Post and
Yeah.
the Khaleej Times in Dubai and the Globe
Yeah.
and Mail in Canada. And so we don't only do the New York Times, but it's easier so that we can show the physical section. That's why we do it this way. But we do this every Sunday, and we'd love to get suggestions for guests from around the world. As you can see, you don't have to live in New York to read the New York Times with us or be part of what we're doing here. Here's an interesting story about Germany response to internet insults,
That is super
harassment, and threats
interesting.
with
Yeah.
criminal charges in defense of free speech, online hate, real life arrests.
Yeah, that's a conversation that's really picking up, and there have been several examples. There's also cases in, not cases, but legislation actually that the European Union wants to bring through on like stemming child sexual abuse online, and how you do that through arrests and through not through arrests, but through regulating it and making it like there's a legal pathway to reporting on what's happening online. But yeah, that's super interesting about Germany.
For Americans, this will be hard to understand, but we're making it clear that anyone who posts hate messages might expect the police to be at their front door afterwards, says the head of the Federal Criminal Police Office in Germany. So that's interesting. And Silicon Valley's Boys Club strikes a defiant pose. An insular culture which forgives missteps by men remains largely unchanged. This is, of course, on the business side, but of course, this is also everything we've seen as a result of the Me Too movement and everything else, but it's still different in Silicon Valley. The Sunday Star. Yeah, sorry,
Such a massive. I was just thinking about the arrest or reporting in general. I mean, there's a big report that came out from the International Federation of Journalists on female journalists and the hate and the kind of the abuse that they face online, especially on social media, and the reporting of that on social media and how effective it is. Because I've always kind of had this this presumption that if someone verbally abuses you, that is akin to what would happen if someone was doing it on the street. Like, you can't really say that it's so different, but it has been proven that it's more towards female journalists than it is to male journalists. So that's always something to
Sure.
keep in mind.
Yeah, it's really problematic here in America. It's a big problem. Here is Constance Wu's new book. You might know her from Crazy Rich Asians and from Fresh Off the Boat, the TV series. And let's see what else they have in here. This is Serial, the podcast that brought a lot of attention to the story about Adnan,
I was a big
the
listener.
person who served 22 years in prison, and he was freed just this week. But they will decide whether they will try him again. But he served 22 years for. He was convicted of killing his former girlfriend. But the Trojan Horse Affair, a mystery told in 8 parts. Listen now, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's NY Times podcast.
I was addicted to Serial at the time. I mean, it was so well done, and I mean, of course, it's kind of cynical to say, but that's such a big, bonus for NPR as well that this happened in the last week. And for Adnan Syed as well. Let's see.
Sure,
yeah, that'd be fascinating to see what happens next.
Sure. This is the social cues column, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. There's an etiquette question, no right or wrong answers.
Okay.
Long friendship, snap judgment. I have a childhood friend I see once a year. An acquaintance told me she discovered that her husband and my friend have been having an affair for 10 years. She came to me because I'm a mutual friend with them on Facebook. She was going to confront my friend, but I don't know where things stand. This left a bad taste in my mouth, and I'm not interested in seeing my friend again. When she gets in touch, can I put her off, or must I explain myself? So there's a question about whether you explain things to friends you see only once a year.
Oh my goodness. I think you explain, but then try not to talk again maybe afterwards with it. What do you think? I think I would
So here it
explain.
says, so you want to dump a childhood friend based on a report of a near rando. What seems judgmental, and that seems judgmental, and even if true, a harsh response to a probably complicated situation that is none of your business. I suggest taking a thorough moral inventory of your life to confirm your perfection before condemning others.
Well,
Otherwise, tell her you're busy if she calls. This is Philip Galanz's response
so this
on this
is
story.
someone you can write into, like a Dear Ruth every week, or what?
Yes, you can. Social cues,
What?
Philip Galanz. You can tweet at him. You can
Okay,
send questions to socialq@nytimes.com, or
right.
you can reach out to Philip at socialqphilip
Perfect.
on Twitter. And here is also you can see this is the wedding section, and you see marriage equality come alive here, where you see men getting married and women getting married. What is the state of in Europe generally around marriage equality?
It's pretty progressive. In most countries, and like the first, it's a silly example, but the first example that comes to mind is that there's, like in advertising, you would see more couples of the same sex these days, even from younger couples. There's decided the moment for coffee where the father kind of brings coffee to his daughter and her new kind of girlfriend house, but there's also countries which are not progressing and going very further back, including, say, Serbia or Hungary or Poland, where, for example, there was a gay pride parade that was cancelled by the government, which I believe, because I didn't look into the details, it went on because people went and marched anyway. But or yeah, but there are certain countries which aren't as progressive as the rest.
Sudha Parekh, that's Neil's mom, says a very good guest on a
Aww.
very interesting topic. So, hi Sudha, great to see you. We love having the Parekh family join us. This is the Voyages issue of the New York Times Magazine, where the wild things are 6 photographers around the world in search of animal encounters. Are you
That's a great topic.
are you an animal person?
Absolutely, absolutely. I
good.
have a cat runs the house, and try to be as conservationist as possible. But that sounds like a great visual.
Yeah, this is lots of great photographs here. This is the Voyages section issue where they have this once a year, and they do great photography. Look at that cat. And lots to see here. Finally, we're looking at the Sunday opinion. A far-right darling and working-class Democrat are locked in a tight House race in Washington. The battle captures where our country is and where we are headed. And this is our political future. I know people in Europe keep a close eye on things happening here. So what is the mood, the general feeling in Brussels about what is going to happen with America's future?
About young politicians?
Or no, just America's politics. What is the general feeling you have when you look here?
When I see that, yeah, I mean, it looks like not about thoughtful people who are actually considering their future, but it's, yeah, I mean, politics and today it's complicated, people are turning away from large institutions and older parties. It's so difficult to pinpoint what comes next, like what comes. It's scary to think about 2024 and where you are, for example, even for me, and I'm here and should be worried about kind of my neighborhood and what's happening in this area, but it's not so simple anymore since we are so globalized, like you said before. It was Democracy Day on the 15th of September, and we had quite a lot of conversations here. And I know that this weekend, I believe, no, the 28th, there's a big democracy forum in Athens, which used to be part of the New York Times, but now it's a foundation that runs it. These great talks.
The birthplace of democracy, right?
Yeah, exactly. But this forum tries to bring all these ideas together, and it's not easy to think about the future, but in some ways, it's also a big part of what democracy is. At least that's what I've I've heard and I've seen, in that it keeps on transforming along with the people that are making the decisions. So one of the main things is, I think, like to be educated, like you were saying, on media education and
Sure.
like critical thinking and being able to separate what's real and not, because
Last story here, we're just looking at the editorial. Is this threat to a democracy is hiding in plain sight? Trump and his allies are trying to take over the machinery of American elections. As you know, a lot of the final calls and the vote counting is done state by state in America. And one of the things that Trump and his allies decided was that the people who made those calls were not far right enough, or not conservative enough, or not on his side. And so the people are running for that office. This is one of the things that most people around the world won't understand, that this is an elected post rather than kind of career folks deciding this. And that's part of the problem here as well. So
that was kind of fascinating and scary part of like the end of that last election, where was it governors who would come out and would have to,
the secretaries of state in each state, who were doing that, under the governor.
Where you could feel their division and there was trying to like release results where the president was going against. It was really
sure
terrible.
Well, what we want to do is, because we're so excited about these two special sections in the paper, we want everyone to have a chance to grab their own copy of the special sections. We want to show you here the New York Times. We mentioned this already, but here you can go to readalong.link/NYT cooking, and you can get this PDF and gift link for free. You can grab it right now. So I hope you will all do that. Readalong.link/NYT cooking. There are so many different dishes here: sheet pan mushroom parmesan, pan seared ranch chicken, and it's free and you can grab it even if you don't have a subscription. Cauliflower adobo, and it's all 7 ingredients or less. So roasted chicken with fish butter sauce. So many fun and interesting dishes, including an onion pie and pasta and kimchi grilled cheese. Wow, these are things that you may not think of, but definitely take a look. And you can get the PDF and the free link at readalong.link/NYT cooking. And we also want to remind you that till noon Eastern, that is for a couple of more hours, you can get the New York Times for kids. You can get the section from our website at NYT link, readalong.link/NYT kids. So much great material here. So we want everybody to get this, and including how to start your own newspaper.
That's fantastic. I wish we had a school newspaper when I was in school, seriously.
Yeah, it shows you how to put it all together and what to do. Look at these, they're like a worksheet. You can see even the blank pages here.
Did you have anything like that when you were growing up?
No, not like this. And though I think there were a lot more kids-oriented news opportunities that you could get. As you said, you described the one in Australia too. So that was.
But I think it's such great practice that the US has, where actually, say for high schools, because
there's a whole high school journalists association and all of that.
These are the main things I will see in movies or series or whatever, where the kids actually are part of making the yearbook, or the kids are part of having a school paper, but that's not something that I've seen. And I think that would be more intrinsic into getting into media education and getting people,
drum roll, please. It's time to pick an instrument, and it shows you here how to pick different instruments if you want to play. Let's bring Neil back and just say to Alia what a wonderful chance it was for us to speak. Neil, we had so much fun.
Absolutely. We just have a few more minutes left in the show. We will give Alia a little break. We'll take her off screen, make a few announcements. Alia, when you come back, we'd like to ask you for a final word about Press Club Brussels Europe, and a pro tip for journalists, particularly from the perspective of someone based in Europe. For U.S. journalists, what is your pro tip for covering Europe in general? So we will give you a quick break, and then Sri. Again, what a great show! And as you mentioned, I mean, we covered a broad range of topics, not just looking at the work that Press Club Brussels Europe is doing on climate change, which got a lot of interest from our viewers. But I think also their work on media freedom and the scholarship, the prize that they have, the Daphne Caruana Galizia Prize, and what a story! And even just in doing the research for the show, new evidence has come to light just in the last month on that assassination. So it really was great, and it's always good to get another perspective on the news and what we're talking about.
And this week in particular, with everything going on in Europe, to hear her thoughts were just perfectly timed.
Absolutely.
And scary, of course, as we talked about with what Putin's been saying.
And I'll say, personally, it was great to have you back in the big chair doing the interview. It's always great to see how you bringing your journalist mindset to the table. So
thank you. And great teamwork as always with Paula as well.
Absolutely. Paula Kiger is our producer, helping out on Facebook and LinkedIn. One of the hallmarks of our show is that we're putting in links to articles and adding context, engaging with the audience. Too many shows just set up, a live stream and let people watch. But we engage with the audience, and Paula, thank you for that. Paula is part of the consulting firm that Sri set up, Digimentors. We produce high quality virtual and hybrid events. And we also do trainings and workshops. So if you're interested in having us either produce a show for you, or if you want us to do a social media audit, etc., or recruitment, send us an email. You can reach us at sri@digimentors.group or neil@digimentors.group. Again, Sri's email is sri@digimentors.group, and mine is neil@digimentors.group. We also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, our long-term sponsor, Muckrack. Thank you so much for all of your support. And they've had some recent news. They got $180 million in VC funding for their work. So congratulations to our friends at Muckrack. We also want to do a shout out to the local connection. Every week, the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings you the Local Connection newsletter. They offer story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. So with that, Sri, we'll bring Alia back on to offer her pro tip for journalists.
Alia, thank you so much for being with us. We learned so much. We had lots of fun, and we discussed lots of serious things, but also some fun things. And thank you for all you do. Tell us again about the Press Club and then your pro tip, please.
Sure. So Press Club Brussels Europe is based here in Brussels, but of course we're also online. So if there's anything we can ever do to help, or if you ever have any questions or need to find something in Brussels, but you don't know where to start, especially if you're a journalist, please feel free to reach out. It's a space for journalists to meet physically, but it's also a platform to speak about, politics, media freedom, issues of the day. We're trying our best with Climate.Brussels and to bring forward stories of journalists that have been impacted either by legal issues or the rising problems in covering important topics. That's global, but it's definitely the case in Europe as well. My pro tip, I think, is just to go with your curiosity and go with what makes you move. Because if it's not, sometimes you have no choice but to write and investigate these things, and that's usually the ones that are the most powerful. So there's only one you, so bring whatever makes you unique to the fore. That's kind of my pro tip, if I can contribute in some way.
Yes, that was very, very, very helpful. I'm sure there are folks who are watching who are following Europe closely, and some of them may be writing about Europe in the days and months ahead, so they would welcome that.
And we're very much connected to the institutions here, or anything else that would be of help.
Great.
Sri, we had a few comments come in. Diana says, great show today. Alia is amazing. She is a rock star. And Diana also thanks the New York Times Read Along team. Linda Lawrence says, must go, but thanks for today. Always informative and enjoyable. And Chris, watching from Thailand, fantastic coverage. Thank you. And I never got a chance to say hi to my mom, Sri, so I'm putting her comment back. Hi, Mom. Alia, usually she'll get her comment that she's watching at the beginning of the show, and I get to say hello to her at the beginning, but I never got to this time. But
fantastic.
We're glad she did. And everyone, please follow Alia on Twitter. She's at Eurocentrique. And check out the work that the club does. And Pradnya says, wonderful show today. And so people want to get in touch, please tweet at her. And I'm sure you can also find her through the main website. And Rajan says, great to be back after hiatus. Lovely to see everyone. And thank you, Rajan, for being with us. So thanks, everybody. And we are grateful to all of you for being with us. We'll see you again. Thanks, everyone. Bye.